for today, I did this in terms of let's try to have a discussion based on some topical questions that Anne was good enough to prepare, and so that's how I put this together. But as we go along, if you have specific questions, just throw them out there, and I'll try to help answer those. So why don't we go on to the next slide? So these are some of the things that we were hoping to guide the discussion today. You know, at the very top, it talks about, you know, people are seeing these big jumps in pricing and trying to get procurements are a lot harder now than they used to be. And then a whole host of how things really are probably more specific to our community in development. So I'm just going to go one by one, and I guess if people have questions, they can stop me as we go along.
Yeah, and again, for Jason and Madeline, you're going to be able to see when hands are up and when the chat is going on. So if you could moderate the online portion, that would be great. We can't see it.
Thanks, great. So let's go on the next slide. So in terms of you know, what you're seeing in general, you have the pandemic. You've got the Ukraine war, you have things that have come off of those two big events in our world that both happen, you know, they're still kind of happening at the same time. You know, what's happened with some of the larger cities in Asia that have completely shut down, affected not only supply chain, but other economical price changes that affect us even here in the US. So there's lack of production because people not going into the factory because of COVID. There's pent up demand because people haven't stopped needing these things, but the supply isn't quite there yet, whether it's manufacturing or the supply chain. And a lot of these things are global, and a lot of them are local too. But on the global side, the people, if you're shopping for a new car, it's probably really tough. You probably don't find a new car on the lot. You have to order it and wait maybe 6 months, even longer, depending on where it's coming from. I do know anecdotally for like Audi, they get a lot of their electronics from somewhere in Ukraine. So they're switching, you know, how do we deal with that? Computer chips are a lot of the things that we use in constructions today. So in new developments, especially on the HVAC side, the control sides, whether it's for lighting or for your cooling and heating, those all use computer chips. So they're affecting costs and distribution of those things. And then just recently, we're not going to give all that we have out to you, whether it's gypsum, that's the most recent actually, or they're allocating, the manufacturer is allocating to the wholesaler, or wholesaler allocating to the distributor. So as we're trying to purchase large quantities for a large development, say here in Madison, we can only get so much at a time. So that affects, how do you schedule that? You know, decades ago, it was like, let's try to get all the product to the site. And then it was like just-in-time delivery, because that's how manufacturing evolved. Well, now it's like, what do you do? Because everything's set up for just in time. And now there's a little bit of rationing going on. So next slide. So I've touched on some of these, you know, what was it? Oh, this is the crystal ball question.
I think John specifically said, I do not have a crystal ball. And then I put a crystal ball question in there. Your crystal ball is better than my crystal ball.
So, you know, most recently with the war, it makes it even more difficult to predict what's going on. We spent a lot of time talking to our specific suppliers, because every supplier is different depending on what part of the country you're in. So it's like, what are your challenges? And then that helps guide us with pricing and deliveries. But, you know, the supply chain restrictions can be based on COVID issues, or they can be based on the war and what is happening in that part of the world. And like steel, for example. So this is something that I hear a lot where people say, well, steel is because of China or Russia. Most of our steel today is bought from Canada. However, there's still metals that are very valuable, like copper, nickel, that come out of Russia, and that affects the whole global market. So it still affects us. Yeah, so global producers of like nickel, copper, and iron. So that affects just not only steel, but other metals within our industry. In terms of the pricing, there is some leveling that you'll see, but we took like a 20% jump in materials. In the earlier part of this year, we would get weekly and monthly updates from wholesalers and suppliers saying, we're getting another price jump next week. And it was, for a while, it was weekly versus typical trends and material pricing is quarterly or yearly. So this has been going on for almost 18 months, but probably people notice it the most at the beginning of 2022. But some of these things are leveling, and the point I'll be making here is they may drop back down. You probably have noticed this maybe with lumber if you're doing something at home or if you have a wood construction site, but they're probably not going to fall back to as close to the norms as lumber has with other products. So things aren't going to come falling back down to where they were the end of last year, the beginning of this year. It's just, I don't know if that'd be good either, if they took a big crash that way. Lead times are easing up with some things. Like an example, bar joists. So bar joists are something that are used in a lot of the mid to high rises here in our area. And they typically are a long lead item. They really jumped for long lead items at the beginning of the year. So they went something like from 12 to 16 weeks to double that. So these are coming, those kind of lead times are coming back. Some others that we don't know when. An example would be like generators. So those could be, depending on the type of generator you need, could be a year to get one of those.
Then precast and, hasn't that extended way beyond what it used to be as well, and switch gear and things like that?
So switch gear is another one that less than a month ago I was hearing 40 weeks. Then it was 60. So the longest we have a current job that they're waiting 83 weeks for switch gear. So it's a critical part. And we'll talk a little bit more about how do you deal with that.
Yeah.
I would say you guys must be on your phone with your suppliers like multiple times a week, just trying to figure out.
Daily.
Yeah, right.
Next slide. So local labor. So in general, labor in construction has been a challenge for years.
Mm-hmm.
Is it affecting the costs that you're seeing now? Not really, because construction has been 4-ish% inflation forever. And that is in the same probably neighborhood of increases for labor, whether it's union or non. So it's been steadily increasing. So we are challenged by not having enough people, but the cost increases that you're probably seeing in the market today aren't as nearly affected by that as we need to buy something different because we can't just buy this anymore. And this is double what it was last year, things like that. So let's go on to the next slide. So how are we trying to figure this out? How are we trying to manage this? So most, I'd say 99% of what I do is conceptual budgeting. So I have like a napkin sketch and I try to get Ian or another developer to a contract and get things figured out. So what we try to promote, at least for us at Findorf, is target value design. So we're targeting a specific budget, and then we use that targeted value to help guide design. So that's not uncommon. It's just really we really try to push that now, especially for all these things, whether it's long lead items or just price material. I'm saying here, order the material early, allow for more of that time delay. Look at what those things are, ask those questions if you're a developer. What am I up against for my project? Because they're different project to project. We're seeing folks carrying an inflation cost. So a lot of times you have cost, and then there might be some kind of fees associated or soft cost below that, and then maybe a contingency if your bank is requiring that. Well, now I'm saying maybe we should, what's the inflation going to be? So there'll be a discussion of what is that risk for, where are we in the market today, and how long, when until we buy everything. Maybe wait to get to that GMP contract later. So you can still go to contract, but that GMP amendment may be later in the process as you're trying to navigate inflation. Warehousing items, can you buy them and store them? Takeover shipping, we just did this recently a couple of months ago, or maybe even less than that, where the supplier couldn't keep up. So we went out and used our own trucks to get materials to the site. Plan these lead times. So how do you deal with that switch gear that turns on the power for the building, and it's coming at when you're putting in finishes versus halfway, maybe. Supply source investigation. This is just kind of a daily thing. Where is it coming from? How is it getting here? Is it coming by ship from overseas? So that's a whole different. So the containers you see in trucks, they're coming from one of the coasts, right? And so when they come off the boat, one, they're not coming into port like they always did because there's now restrictions due to COVID. They can only come in at a certain amount of time. So they don't want boats stacked up. They don't want people stacked up. Mm-hmm. So that's what's causing a lot of the delay. And then you have some manufacturers like in China that the whole city where 90% of the stuff comes from is shut down. They're just not working. So you have a domino effect with overseas shipping.
Are you trying to avoid that just because of all of the okay?
Yep, absolutely. Provide cash advance. So that's like when we talk about commitments, usually we're talking about when do we need to, for us, when do we need to write a subcontract? And you back that up and it's like, well, when do we need to get to that GMP so we can get a contract so we can do that? Now it's like, can we write a commitment? Can the owner help write and purchase something early? Where does that fall? Is that an option? But before that really wasn't asked. Today we're asking that. Is that an option? And there's risk in that. And then and we've done this before where you go and you actually go to the manufacturer and you visit their site and go, prove to me that you can make the schedule, and we want to see it. And sometimes we'll put insurance on that.
Interesting.
Yeah. Next slide. So how's the owner's developer? So it's flexible. We're going to have to get a little bit out of our comfort zone and ask questions we haven't asked before, right? Phasing, speed to market, science and tech. Is how quickly can we ramp up production and get the new product on market? We just got our FDA approval. So we're losing money every day. So how do we do that? So it may be, can we get manufacturing and then office and then sales? How is that facility broken down? Can we phase construction of those things? And then contingencies. And sometimes contingencies are dollars, and they're also people related. So maybe it's like you're bringing on staff in waves, because you're building in phases as well. Next slide. Schedules and timeline. So we're just trying to be creative. On the negotiated side, we're bringing up all these topics early, whether it's we're targeting the design to the budget, a lot harder than we may have before. We're doing some of these phasing things. We're working that into the schedule. I've always promoted, hey, when do I need to give an answer? Let's put those decision points in the schedule. That's even more important today. So it's kind of like go or don't go on certain decision points. Those need to be in the schedule now. And now we're tying those kind of go, no go dates to manufacturing and to delivery. So if you have a new project, talk about that with your contractor. Say, hey, I get the normal schedule, base core and shell, MEP stuff, finishes. Let's put in there, when do I have to make decisions and what are the weird lead times I have to deal with? And, put those in your schedule and watch them. Because it's going to be critical. You don't want the surprises. You're trying to manage those surprises. And then on the hard bid markets, it's even harder, right? Because you're going all the way through the design. You're completing the design. Then you're going out to market. And some of your vendors are like, typically I would give you 30 days to 90 days to sign my PO or my offering. Some now are saying, no, sign the PO. I'm not going to extend this offer more than a week. I've heard some horror stories that they're not even honoring current signed purchase orders.
Well, that's crazy.
The loss to them and whatever risk there is for not honoring it is greater than having nothing from the main supplier or a part piece. Now that's usually like by manufacturing. I just heard that recently with a glazing manufacturer out there, but then I went and I talked to some of our vendors and that was only specific to that. So, but now what we do is we're like, is that trend gonna fall
I was gonna say,
to others? Are they gonna pick that trend up?
Yeah.
So we try to watch that and go, is that just them or is that the whole market? And so before, a trend usually was general and easy to follow. Now they're specifically for material. Next slide. So what are we really challenged with? These are the top 3 to 5 things that Findorf is dealing with the most this month. So doors, frames, and hardwares. This can be related to a specific door, like hollow metals or certain kinds of wood doors. A lot of it is having to do with hardware, but it's anywhere from 14 to 40 weeks. That's a crazy gap. So I got this current information this last week from just surveying all of our PMs and what they're dealing with. So some of these they know about, and some of these they were expecting it in 12 weeks. So that's what, 3 months? It's still a long time. And this is after you've negotiated the price, contract, then there's shop drawings to make sure everything's okay. This is after that. And some of these dates are from surprises. Sorry, we're just not ready yet. Type of what we're getting. Rooftop units. So that has a lot of it related to aluminum and the chips. So 6 months plus switchgear. That's that 80 weeks. So it's a year plus. That's in our world. That's insane.
And John, what were some of those? Maybe give context of what was a rooftop unit, 2 years ago or something,
half that time. These are double.
Okay. These are double. Yeah.
These are double.
And these are estimates.
Some of these, like the 52 to 80, has been job specific, but these are real. We're waiting today on these timelines. So this is, I'm not saying, I think it's 80 weeks. We have one job that's 83 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We have one job that's 60 weeks.
Yeah.
4 weeks ago, it was 50 weeks. I'm like, what? No way.
Right.
Well, it's gone beyond that. Access controls. So the card swipe, the key fob,
Yeah.
the electric lock, the buzz them in. those are related to the electronics, which are, you went from wiring everything by pieces to like, let's put this part together and then let's outsource that. So some of those outsources are being delayed. And then the chips for some of the computer side of it, the black box, so to speak, those are being delayed as well. And then specialty lighting is a little bit different, but this relates to how do we deal with things now. It's like we're going to narrow the choices that we make in our finished product to keep it more with what's the current trend and what do people have a lot of, versus going outside of the box a little bit with things that are maybe custom color or specific controls or specific lighting needs. So some of these custom things with lighting are going out to a year lead time, which usually you could do a custom order in half that time. So next slide. So what are some of the things we're shifting away from? I mean, that's a big, broad question for specific things, but I can't
You
tell
couldn't, you didn't have to take my question.
No, they're good though. Actually it's good because that's what
I gave
people
him
are
some,
asking.
I was like, these are things I think, well, I had questions on, but I thought other people would share. Things like if, I think of some of these black boxes that are simple, that probably are easy. We don't have to make everything overly complicated. A thermostat doesn't have to be
That's
a
right.
Nest thermostat. So are people shifting back, or how are people evolving?
That is happening. It's a little bit different for everyone, depending on what their focus is. So less curtain wall glazing. That is an easy one here from Madison, because we also have a new ordinance for bird glass, and people are still navigating through what's that mean? What's that mean for my project? Because certain parts of that ordinance has to do with setbacks of the building, has to do height, has to do the square foot of area of that particular opening. So curtain wall, as it goes from floor to maybe roof on your building, that's a lot of glass. That's a lot of bird glass, and that's a lot of aluminum. Aluminum is driving the glazing industry right now. And some of the glazers are just now, probably in the last few months, have started to see increases, similar to like metals. So Lake City Glass does a bunch of work here in town, and we're always in communication with them. And they're going to get another 10% on just the glazing. So as you look around in this building, you see all this beautiful glass. It's glass. There's caulking and rubber, and then there's aluminum, and then the internal. Sometimes there's internal reinforcing. So all those parts and pieces have different manufacturers, and they have all different lead times. So for the glazing industry, all these things kind of combine. Today, mostly I would say it's the aluminum side of things in that market that is driving those costs up. They're probably up in the 20% from a year ago. More brick than higher end metal panel screen walls. So I'm picking on the exterior of the building again. But really what people are doing is, what's the current market price for my materials? Can I shift the percentage of these things around a little bit to make a difference? So it's not like we're not doing one thing. We're taking, whether it's the skin or the interiors, or like, what can we do with what's easily available for today's world and cost efficient for today's world? And can we change what we were doing yesterday a little bit differently? Not like totally getting rid of it, but just shifting maybe percentages of how we use the different things in the buildings.
Are you doing some of those changes after you've already gone through the whole design, everything, and now when you're getting the lead times on some of these materials, you're having to go back? I mean, like, okay, now
we're trying to avoid that.
You're right.
So when I said target value design, we're trying to say, hey, curtain wall is crazy.
Okay.
Heads
up. Yeah.
Maybe we want to not use so much of that. What are the other options? In our industry, we'll say a punched opening. That's just a window. in brick or metal panel or such.
Sure.
So can we work with that? And it's like, and you're looking to the developer, to the owner, and to the architect. You know, what are the goals of the project? And so there's some push and pull that you have to do there.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, a good process, you know, that a lot of us find to be good on the development side is to kind of pick a contractor early on that you're comfortable with, that you have experience with, work with your architect to design and price kind of at the same time as you're coming up with your concept. And it becomes complicated by things like city approvals too. And we're trying to maybe value engineer out one thing or another, and then you go into a meeting and they say, we want more X, and you're like, God.
Well, that's a great point, because what we're trying to do is do these things in parallel, right?
Right.
And you want to go to the city early and go, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Can I get early feedback before I get too far ahead of myself?
Sure.
And we're like, well, we're going to do 6 revisions of your idea to see what works. So sometimes you might be delaying going to the city, or you're coming back and going, well,
Just kidding. This is what I really want to do now. Yeah.
There's going to be a little bit of that.
Yeah.
We're seeing a little bit of that. It's not horrible, but
It's another risk,
Yeah,
right?
it's
That,
another
you know,
piece
you're
that's
going
different.
on an assumption that what
Right.
you're doing is gonna be well received.
So,
Right.
and developers, are you guys understanding that, you know, in the past, you've been able to be like, this is what I want, this is my big, beautiful building that I'm gonna want, and then understanding that with all these changes, that realistically, what you have in your mind may not be what you get to build because of all of these changes and possible things that are going on. I know that that's a really hard pill to swallow because.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I can't see, we have 26 people out there, so we can't see you, but there might be other developers too who wanna weigh in. Certainly I've had some disappointments where you think you can afford something that you end up not being able to afford in a
Sure.
budget, or maybe your bank doesn't think you can get the rents you can get, and they won't let you use your pro forma.
It's always back to
So
that
there's
right
always
there.
some disappointment of, I wish I could have done this, but you know,
Yeah.
I'm budget constrained in some respect. But usually, I mean, I think for folks that have been doing this a while, you're
Expectations
doing
are there,
small changes throughout a project to narrow in on a final concept. And you know, really, if it ends up being something that you can't be proud of, or you can't rent, or you can't lease, then you have to say, look at these changes that we've made sacrifice the quality or the perceived quality so much
Sure.
that this project just doesn't work anymore.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think that's one of the other questions. Why don't we go to the next
I'm jumping ahead.
slide?
John, before you go on to the next slide, though, Bill Connors has a question that has been answered. Bill, I don't know if you want to ask your question about time project.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think some of it just got covered by Ann's question, but you know, if you got to go to the Urban Design Commission in Madison, they're going to approve exactly what you have to build. I mean, all the external materials are going to be exactly specified in their approval. So how early in this process do you have to make these decisions about switching out different materials? Because once you get that Urban Design Commission approval, unless you're going to go back and ask for a reapproval, I mean, that seems to me to be a real headache.
It can be. It just depends on how much lead time up to when you want to get in the ground you have, and that's different for everybody. Sometimes you don't own the property, you have a hold on it basically, right? And that has a limit and risk associated. But in terms of the process of the design, as you have your concept and you're working through the concept to more schematic drawings that have a little bit more detail. So somewhere towards the later schematics, or you're going to that UDC, maybe early design development. Now it's early. So what we're doing is trying to have those discussions early and talk about the process more versus usually it's on the schedules, like this is when we want to go to Common Council and UDC. This is our, when are our meetings and how do those line up with design? So now we're trying to have those discussions earlier to saying, okay, this is our targeted meeting times in the city process. but what are the effects before we get too far in the design? So we're doing, I would say I'm doing more conceptual studies of like skins or interiors or mechanical systems in conjunction with design. So we're probably doing maybe 25 to 50% more budgeting or studies to help answer those questions, Bill. So it's in the end, it's going to push it. You know, it's probably going to take more time, and you're just going to have to be more engaged.
And I think people will probably have to go back to UDC for staff level or committee level, you know, tweaks to design as they change. I mean,
Yeah.
that's reality.
Yes. Yeah. Let's go on to the next slide. And we're starting to touch on some of these things now, right? You got to be talking all the time, really, specific to your, you know, what are the trends? What are strategies to beat the inflation? Engage early. So, you know, it's hard, I think, for developers, owners to make that first commitment to a contractor, but you know, it's like you got to pick a horse and go with them, and with intent, especially today, it's probably more important than ever, and work through some of these issues. And kind of like as Ann put these questions together, this is the questions you should be asking, even if it's a remodel. For those that just are doing a remodel with existing space, there may be something odd about your remodel that could be a year lead time. And you still have to go through some permitting process along with that as well. So try to engage and get that questions out first. So usually it starts like, here's my idea, here's my concept. So now it's, here's my idea, here's my concept, and I've got a long list of questions I want to make sure before we say yes to my concept. Why don't we go on to the next slide? So what's been paused? In our world, we're seeing less office work being done. You know, do we have that main tenant that's going to commit to our project before we sign our GMP contractor? That's the way that we like to mostly do it. And some of those folks that are coming to Madison are like, you know, not everyone's all back in office. We're still 50-50 or 25-75 or whatever. We're not sure if they're going to just stay home or if we're going to bring them back. So we're not committing. Or
it's probably more work from home related, right? As opposed to inflation or supply chain issues.
Yeah. And all related to COVID.
Yep.
What's interesting though, at least I'm hearing more and more, yeah, we will come back, versus at the beginning of the year, maybe we'll never go back. So that's a tough one to predict out there. Hospitality and lodging. For our area, you know, I'm not seeing a lot of that. We were probably lagging in hotel rooms in the Madison area anyways. We do have some contacts with more national change, and they've slowed down just a little bit. But those offices probably that was the first one that came to mind for here. We've been very fortunate here in Wisconsin for construction, because we were allowed to keep working. So we've still had a strong workload, but for offices, that's probably been the one thing that hasn't seen it come.
This is one question. I'd be curious, other people that are on the camera that would be able to weigh in too, because there is a few apartment buildings that we heard. I think the recent one I saw in the newspaper is the gentleman that was going to do something down on West Wash. He said, hey, he's going to push it a whole year now because of the uncertainty of the pricing and such. And so I don't know if there's other projects out there that others have heard about that are being pushed because of either supply chain or because of the cost of product these days. So
I just got a call a week ago from someone saying, I'm struggling. I don't think I can make this work. Should I cut my losses and sell the property? Should I wait a year? And I felt bad because I couldn't say, you should definitely do this.
Right.
You just missed that one, you know,
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm here to help. But no, it was a difficult discussion. You know, it's like, are material prices gonna come back down? That's gonna help that specific project in here. Should I commit now in case material prices don't keep going up?
Right.
You know, there's a part of this too is if you're a manufacturer or something and you have had small margins for a decade, and you're not gonna come back down. You're gonna wait until the demand falls off. And we don't necessarily, whether you're on the contracting side or the developing side, want demand to fall off the cliff,
No.
right? That's not good for the economy. So it's just not all, you know, supply and inflation. There's some of this has to do with how people are seeing it for their own companies if they're on this, you know, maybe on the manufacturing side. So it's a difficult question. They were on the fence to answer that question really. So it's very project specific and the risk you have with the land and how far you're into that process. And you know, I would say keep working through it. And if you're able to make commitments early to manage that risk, I think that's the best thing to do. The more you can commit and manage those risks, whether it's warehousing things, to where your costs are more, but they're incrementally less than, you know, another 5%, 10% increase. Let's go on to the
John,
next
we've
one.
got a question from Ron Leslie.
Hi, Ron.
Thank you. Thanks, John, for doing this. You know, we hear a lot today in the political rhetoric about the idea that we should be making more building materials and other things in the United States as opposed to sourcing them from other countries. Have you seen, is there any reality that this is going to happen, or is it just political rhetoric?
So I can say that probably over the last 10 years, we've gone more and more for some materials in China and in Asia, just because the cost was so crazy. And we've seen a trend of US manufacturers going to like India and China and some of those countries and setting up shop to create some of their materials. Because of the supply chain right now, it's like you do not want to be waiting on a shipping container. So we're trending to things that we can get here more locally. I'm saying that like North America, so Canada or even Mexico still. And as I'm saying that, we're also seeing currently in the last few months a trend for, I'm thinking of a window manufacturer right now, and they're out of Germany. And they've got a great product, and but now it's a wait and see. So it's different shipping lines, but they're closer to the war. So yes, we are trying to do things more locally, and I know that there's a push for manufacturing more here. Like I said, most of our steel comes from Canada, but there's a long lead time to that. You just don't say, hey, go produce more. So someone's got to build the factory and then hire the people. A lot of that manufacturing equipment does not come from the US, it comes from overseas. So that's going to be a really slow process. So I think there is a trend. I have no idea how far that's going to go. I think when things calm down again, you'll see a leveling effect. And maybe it'll switch back. But for right now, we're trying to stay away from as much of that shipping as possible.
Is there some good stuff going on? Positive stuff going on?
Yeah. We're still
It is.
building.
That's the good part.
You came in late.
I've got the Jeeps here.
I was listening on the phone. I'm like, there has to be something good coming out of this.
So I'm here, sorry to disappoint.
We're still building.
I think the good news
I'm waiting.
is, and I'm glad you said, the good news is our people are getting together and they're working harder on communicating on those challenges. So what can we do? So those conversations are happening, and I think that's a good thing, especially for, the pandemic has kept us apart. So this is like, we have to get together and work this out. So I think that's a good thing. And I think in terms of trends, we'll have to come up with new ways of doing things to combat some of these challenges. So some of those new ways of doing things may trend to be something that people think is cool, and it may just stay that way for a while. So I think it will change design a little bit, and how we do business. So what kinds of projects are pushing ahead in terms of good things? Science and tech is not slowed down at all, and they're pushing forward. Healthcare. So healthcare was like put on pause. And so if they had money allocated in their budget, and it's still there, that's going forward. Multifamily and student housing, especially in our area, still going on. I think it'll be a harder trend for the affordable housing folks, because that's so dependent on cost, and they have less variables to work with to make the projects work. So I think that's going to really need some creativity going forward. Warehousing. So people are like, I better store my stuff. So people are building more warehousing. Manufacturing. Back to Ron's question, is like, how can we start producing more here locally in the US or Canada? So more manufacturing. And K-12. K-12 hasn't slowed down. I don't know if that is going to slow down more in the future. That's so much referendum.
Mhm.
So you could have a referendum process that's a year in advance of even maybe design development. So we'll see. So how is the economy affecting moms and dads in the local communities to say yes or no to a referendum?
Sure.
We don't know. We haven't seen anything,
Right.
Jeff?
Nope, things are still getting approved.
Yeah. Next slide. So this last one is I threw it in here, and there is so much out there in the world. Whether you go to ENR, or you go on the web and you just type in what's inflation, what's construction, there is a ton of information out there. And I think it is very, very confusing. But this PPI graph is just based on the percent increase over time. And you can see how flat it is in the last decade. We get to 2020, so mid-year, March-ish, things took about a 20% jump. So that reflects what we're seeing. So I just had to answer, it was actually 2 months ago. I had to say, we did a price last September. What's your guess on what it's going to be later into 2022? And it was a 10% increase. In that study, for me and what I'm doing, has been 10 to 20% for the total project. So as we talk, like, oh my God, that's double the time to get, or it's double the cost. Like rebar was $800 to $900 a ton. Now it's $1,700. So it's double. That's a lot. But that's one piece of a big part of the building. So just because rebar is double doesn't mean my building is double.
Sure.
Concrete's going up too. That's a different problem. Before the world decided to go through all this, there's a change in cement product. And so that change is causing problems. So there's a lot happening out there now, and I think we all relate it to these couple of things, the war and COVID, but there's other things happening. It's just that they're happening at the same time as this other stuff. And so altogether, that's maybe what's creating the challenges. So I think going back and having conversations early and asking these questions early, that's the best way to do it, because we are finding ways to navigate through this. We're figuring it out. It does sound kind of doom and gloomish, but we're figuring it out. We're phasing things differently. We're just saying, okay, well, I have to wait a year. So how do we get that thing when it shows up? And let's keep track of it along the way. And that's just the way life is right now.
A lot more consulting.
But we're doing it.
Yeah.
And it's working, and buildings are going up and developments are happening.
Yep.
It's just, there's just gonna be more time involved.
Yeah.
So I think that's
That's
the end. There's a bunch of questions. I thought they were all good and I wanted to get through them.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just to not also end this on a better, I mean, I look around and I see the number of permits, I see the number of cranes. It feels like people are working out and Matt is working it out. It's harder, right?
Mhm.
But we have a strong market where people are wanting to invest and find ways to do it. But I think some of the things that come to mind are like, well, what can we do to help? And I was thinking about how is, you talked about phased occupancy, like, is that something the city could be more helpful on as buildings come up, things like that, how do we, urban design, how do we make them aware of some of these challenges? And maybe there are still some things we can do locally with the information you've given us to create some better path forward.
That's a great point, because some of those discussions have to come from the city top down. Because when you end up with individual building inspectors that by right have their own interpretation of some codes. So you want to have those discussions globally, from when you're going through the approval process with the fire department and inspection, or how's that going to affect inspection, right? For those phasing type things. Because I would bring those things right up at the beginning. It's like, to make this work, we're going to have to phase this. How can we make this work so that I don't get inspected and go, well, I'm not getting the occupancy because your fire alarm is not matching what we typically do. What are some of those discussions with inspection, with the fire department? You go, oh, we may have to add a firewall, or let's add a pair of doors, or what are those things? And at the very beginning, there are small incremental changes but if you're going to delay the opening of your project, that's a big deal. So that's a great point. It just means that you can't rely on the way that you used to do business. You have to ask those, what if we only opened half the floors and we didn't open up the rest of the floors?
Right.
What's that mean
Right.
to the city, to inspection?
To your bank.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to your pro forma,
Yeah, right.
to your investors,
Yeah.
right? This is a phased,
Thanks. Jason, are there any other questions online that I'm missing right now?
No other questions right now.
Okay. Thank you. I've learned a lot, and
This
your
was
crystal
great.
ball is way better than mine. And I think a lot of folks will benefit from watching us after the fact too. I think on our agenda, we had hoped to touch on some of the topics that DMI is starting to track, and to have an open discussion about those topics, but we only have 5 minutes left. The one that comes top to mind, Jason, and I see Bill Connors on the screen, is the energy benchmarking proposal that is going through the city. And so I'm certainly willing to discuss that, but I want to let people know too that we have a couple opportunities for DMI members and the general public to learn more about what the city's proposing. The first one was yesterday, and I wasn't there. Maybe someone can tell us what happened. But the upcoming ones are on the 27th of July and the 3rd of August at 1 p.m. And you can find those dates on the city website. And we can also, I think we've also sent them out to this committee already.
Yes, and I attached a link in the chat right now to both of the two workshops the following 2 Wednesdays.
Great. Does Bill or Jason, was anyone at the meeting yesterday? Is there anything you want to share about how it's going and what we should be looking for and expecting out of this process?
Right. Yeah, I participated in yesterday's workshop, and the city staff, they haven't, and the alders who are involved in this, they already have a general framework, and they're trying to get answers to specific technical issues that fit within that framework. And it was kind of a frustrating process for everybody involved. Number one, because they're using a virtual platform to try to get feedback. So they're making people create virtual Post-it notes and stick it on a virtual wall, which was kind of challenging. When we spent the first half hour of the meeting figuring out how to use the virtual online tool. And then, So yeah, I've got people who are very, very busy business people spending a half hour trying to figure out how to use this tool. And then the problem is that we had a bunch of people on the call who were like, why does this even make sense? How is this even going to produce any sort of benefit? Any sort of useful information in like 40% of the situations we deal with, and they didn't want to, the city staff didn't want to engage in that. They wanted to try to get answers to their technical questions. So I don't know, this process is going to be challenging. But yeah, the bottom line is that they want all large commercial property owners to report annually the total energy use of each building, regardless of who occupies the building, regardless of whether it's a net lease. They don't care. They want the building owner to report total energy use every year. And that somehow that's supposed to be beneficial to making decisions about energy usage in the buildings. And then second of all, every 4 years, they want the building owner to do some sort of energy tune-up for the building to make sure all the systems are working correctly. And that will need to be defined about what exactly constitutes a tune-up. But that's the general framework, and there's a lot of questions. And the complication is that the lease structure is very different within each building, and trying to do a one-size-fits-all kind of program is a challenging thing.
I think there are also some concerns, which we share, SmartGrowth does, about where this information goes, the city being the repository for that information and possible public records requests. So there's a lot of details that are still yet to be decided and non-desirable.
Yeah. I mean, the city isn't planning to put this out and make it available to the public, but if somebody makes an open records request, they can get the data if the city is the holder of the data.
Interesting.
Think of that.
Well, thank you for participating with that and giving, for those of us who didn't, a preview of what we can expect in terms of how we can participate in this. All right. Anything else folks would like to talk about as we wrap up? Bill, you turned green. I can't tell. Nope. All right. I think we've covered it. Thank you for coming. Thank you, John.
Thanks
This
for
was
having me.
really helpful. And thanks for those who came